everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Korea This Week. I'm your host, Sang Kim, and today we have Kyle Ferrier, our Director of Academic Affairs and Fellow, with us. Thank you so much for joining us on this rainy day in DC. So today we'll have to obviously talk about North Korea because that has been on the news a lot, especially over the weekend. But before we get actually started, Kyle, could you kind of give us the overview of all these activities and exchanges that we've been seeing starting last week? There's been a lot going on, so let's just kind of go over the timeline of them.
Sure. If you're like me, you just take a second away to focus on one of the other issues on the Korean Peninsula right now, such as what's going on with the military burden sharing agreement and Korean-Japan issues. You may have looked away for a minute and then come back and noticed, oh my gosh, there's just so much going on. So just to briefly recap some of the events that have been going on since last week's Korea This Week, starting with Tuesday last week, and that's where we had Vice Foreign Minister Ri Tae-sung say the U.S. will need to decide what it wants its Christmas present from North Korea to be, as you know, in aligning with what North Korea Kim Jong-un has said would be the end of year deadline for figuring out a path forward with denuclearization talks with the United States. And then Trump responded to that comment from North Korea, calling Kim Jong-un again Little Rocket Man and saying he and Kim have a great relationship, but if he needed to go back to, or if he needed to go use U.S. military forces against North Korea if the situation called for it, he'd be reluctant but willing to do so. And then on Wednesday, the next day, we see Kim Jong-un on top of a white horse riding on Mount Baekdu, which has a lot of significance for South Korea, certainly for North Korea, both in terms of its historic roots in the Korean people, as well as its roots to Kim Il-sung, who's a guerrilla fighter there, is the supposed birthplace of Kim Jong-il, and for Kim Jong-un to go there, it sort of revives anti-imperialist sentiment, so anti-Japan at the time, now anti-U.S. sentiment again. And then Thursday, Chae Sun-hee, a first vice Minister of Foreign Affairs for North Korea, came out and challenged what Trump had said and said if we start to see more name-calling again, that we'll respond in due kind from the United States and to choose your words wisely. And we also saw initial photographs of preparation for a rocket test at the Sohae missile testing site in North Korea. And then again on Saturday, even more, we see Kim Sung, North Korea's ambassador to the UN, saying that denuclearization is off the negotiating table. And then we also saw a rocket test at North Korea's Sohae missile testing facility, and we're not really sure what exactly it was just yet, but North Korea on Sunday termed it as very important, and it will have an important effect on changing the strategic position of the DPRK of North Korea. And then responding to that again on Sunday, Trump comes out with this tweet saying Kim Jong-un is too smart and has far too much to lose everything, actually, if he acts in a hostile way, essentially saying that North Korea has agreed to denuclearize, and he puts his trust in Kim Jong-un to do the right thing. And then on Monday, today, we have two statements from North Korean officials, one from Kim Yong-chol, saying North Korea is a country which now has nothing to lose, and again referring to North Korea, Donald Trump as a dotard, and then Ri Soo-young, a former foreign minister and who's in charge of foreign affairs for the Workers' Party of North Korea, has said that Kim Jong-un has not yet revealed his final judgment about the fate of his country in the negotiations, so it maybe suggests that there is still room to negotiate before the end of the year deadline. So a lot has happened in the past week, but it really we haven't seen it move the needle in any way so far. We're still sort of in the same position, but I think both sides know how important this is, and we should expect to see more verbosity from both sides in the coming weeks.
Right, and that's a great overview of all the statements and comments that were made by both sides. Let's talk about two things that you mentioned. So one is obviously the latest rocket launch. They call it this important test that they did. I know we're still gathering information, and they're still waiting for reports and stuff. So what do we know so far?
We know it was tested at Sohae,
Right.
and that's just about most of what we know, at least publicly. But what we can say about the Sohae site is that this was something that was really important to President Trump in the Singapore summit. He had asked Kim Jong-un to dismantle it, and we saw a partial dismantle it at the site. But critics at the time said, well, this could be easily reversible, and it turns out their criticism was well-founded, because what we saw was yet another test at the Sohae missile site. But what's different about this time around, well, not necessarily. Sohae was traditionally seen as or was used to test liquid propelled missiles, which are easier to detect where they take a longer time to get set up and launched, so you can detect that a launch is impending. And this, what it may be, as tests this year have been in North Korea, maybe a solid fuel missile, which is a lot easier to fire off. There's not as much warning time that a missile could be launched. So it could be a test of likely some people view as a solid fuel missile. But what may make this a little bit different is that the Sohae site used to be centered towards testing liquid propelled missiles, as I said, which were tested vertically. But North Korea has always tested their solid fuel propelled missiles horizontally. And as Ankit Panda, the diplomat, has pointed out, many advanced countries actually test their solid fuel propelled missiles vertically. So if North Koreans were able to test their solid fuel missile vertically, it would sort of mark, okay, they figured out a way how to qualitatively improve their missile program, which could be their change in strategic standing, as North Korea said this missile test really ushered in.
I also saw the report that some people speculate that this could be testing of a new engine for satellite launcher or ICBM, right? So for President Trump, the shorter range missiles has not been so much of a concern for him compared to the ICBM. But could this be something that have finally pushed the button for President Trump?
I don't know. He seems to keep wanting to push things off until something eventually has to change. And I don't know if North Korea is really going to flaunt that in the U.S. face so far. I think in the past we've sort of viewed satellite launches as a proxy for ICBM test. But there is a case to be made that launching satellite technology requires different technologies, and therefore they're not necessarily using the same machinery. So there could be a case if North Korea successfully used this to test a satellite. The United States in the past saw this as provocative. Trump may try to not view that as such. So we'll continue to see. I think anything short of what we would clearly view as ICBM test or a nuclear test would be something that I think Trump will continuously try to overlook in an effort to push forward denuclearization talks.
Right. So in addition to the testing, the latest testing, the fact that North Korean officials are saying that denuclearization is off the table in negotiation is also something that is concerning to a lot of people. So how should we take this?
I think there's a lot of mixed messaging.
Right.
Denuclearization is off the table. Kim Jong-un hasn't made his final decision yet. There's a lot of people who say denuclearization was never even on the table anyway. Regardless of what your thoughts are, I think the U.S. still needs to push forward with figuring out a way in which to figure out some sort of configuration between partial denuclearization in exchange for partial sanctions relief. This has been the key all year. It's a lot easier said than done, but we haven't really had too much success. The denuclearization part of the negotiations in Hanoi is what really scuttled the deal, or at least what the makings of a deal in Hanoi. And then this year, there hasn't been as much working level talks as the United States would like. Last meeting in Stockholm didn't go very well. I think the U.S. thought it went well, and the North Koreans didn't think so. So it's figuring out a way in which we can sort of bridge the gap between both sides. But from my reading of things, it seems as if both sides are pretty confident in their positions and the hands that they're playing, which could embolden them to try and not move from their starting positions. And if we see that by the end of the year with the self-imposed deadline, we could usher in a new change, a new shift in how we approach North Korea. It could move from one where we're open to negotiations to one where negotiations are no longer on the table, which is obviously problematic for a number of reasons.
Right, and you mentioned the timing a little bit, and there is that, like you mentioned, self-imposed the deadline, which is the end of the year, and then we're approaching it very soon, and then stuff. It seems like there's a frustration on both sides. The deadline is approaching, but there seems to be not much going on. Moving any direction at the moment. So, is there any like hope or anything we can expect towards the end of the year? I mean, what do you think the Christmas present might be?
I don't know. It's kind of hard to make a prediction at this point. I would just note that this isn't the only end-of-year deadline that we're facing. We also have the December 31st deadline for the Special Measures Agreement, the burden-sharing negotiations with South Korea. And I think that these are both problematic for the United States if we aren't able to reach some sort of deal on both. I think the nuclear negotiations with North Korea could arguably be more problematic, but they play into one another quite well, and not in a good way for the United States. So now is a really crucial time. The next 3 weeks are a really crucial time, and I would, as long as there are statements coming out of North Korea suggesting that a final decision has not been made, sort of the good cop, bad cop dynamic, that we should continue to push forward with denuclearization talks, or at least arms control talks, as some have argued with North Korea. We need to figure something out in the coming weeks.
Right. And I also want to talk about South Korea as well. As you mentioned with the SMA agreement and also early on Korea-Japan relations, it has been an eventful year, to say the least, for entire Korean peninsula. So how does South Korea feel about this issues? Obviously, for them, they just barely got over Japan issues. Well, it settled down a little bit, but now that North Korea is starting up at the pot again. So how does South Korea feel?
I think that there are some in the administration who are getting a bit stir crazy, who want something to happen with North Korea, and they're afraid if the window closes, that gives them that means that the window of opportunity for them to pursue engagement with the North, based off of cooperation with the U.S., it will no longer be possible. So I think that there's a lot of pressure coming from people within South Korea to try and get the U.S. to agree to something with the North. But in terms of anything that they can do, really, it's really up to the United States to try and empower the South Koreans, who have a lot of opportunities, or at least have a lot of ideas about how to pursue future opportunities with North Korea. And money is clearly a point of contention for the Trump administration. This is something that South Korea is clearly willing to put up money up front, which wouldn't have to come from the United States, to help push along negotiations with North Korea. So South Korea still plays an important role in all of this, but it'll be, again, something else to watch early next year, depending on what happens, too, with the Special Measures Agreement, which could create tensions. It's obviously creating tensions in the alliance right now, but how this could potentially impact the relationship with North Korea, and how that relates to the U.S. The U.S. strategic architecture in the region, and how South Korea fits within that, and how it chooses to pursue talks with North Korea could all be affected. So a lot to watch for in the next coming weeks, and how it impacts how we deal with North Korea moving forward.
Right, and especially with the latest rocket launch from North Korea, I think South Korean government is very cautious on putting out a statement. The only thing I saw was that they're working closely with the United States to analyze what actually happened. So with that, I'm sure they will put out a statement sooner or later, like either today or tomorrow, on their position. But we'll really have to see where things go. Even though it's a holiday season, there's really no holiday when it comes to Korean Peninsula, I feel like. So that's on the North Korea news. So I do want to talk about the KEI event that's coming up tomorrow. So Kyle, could you tell us a little bit about the program tomorrow that you're moderating?
Sure. So tomorrow's program is about South Korea-Russia relations in the context of the new Northern policy, which is something that the Moon administration...
New Southern policy.
New Northern policy.
Oh. Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
there is a new Southern policy
Sorry.
too. Yeah, and the new Northern policy, and how how Russia and South Korea economic ties are advancing or not advancing, and some of the challenges, including North Korea and other challenges, to improving the relationship that both sides are really looking to sort of capitalize on, but are having difficulty doing. And it'll be a really great program. The speaker is Lyudmila Zakharova. She is a professor in Moscow and is really knowledgeable on the issues.
Great. Yeah, so that's tomorrow at noon. We'll also live stream on Facebook and YouTube as well. So in case you can't attend in person, you can also watch it live. And lastly, so in addition to the APS program, you're also doing call for papers.
Yes, yeah.
So tell us more.
The call for papers is this Friday for our next iteration of the academic paper series. Please send us in your submissions by Friday, and it should be hopefully follow a really great tradition that we have at KEI of producing these really great papers as part of our academic paper series.
Great. And we'll make sure to share the link on the comment section if you're interested, and please do apply by this Friday. So with that, that's everything we have for today. Kyle, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you so much for watching. So we're actually taking a break for holidays, so we'll come back in spring 2020. So thank you so much for your support over the years, and we'll see you next year.